Sego, if you like what we're doing here, if you support the show and you want to give support to the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. And if you do so, we'll provide you some exclusive content and some things that others aren't going to get when you get it. So support us by going to Patreon. Yahweh.
Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
So everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Native. I am John Kane. Look, we're hearing a lot of buzz about the need for unity and coming together and tolerance. And I got to tell you, I'm not against unity. I think the idea of people trying to, come together and rally around their common interests and that kind of stuff is great. The word that I have more trouble with is tolerance. Now, and I'm not saying that everybody should be completely intolerant. I just think there has to be a place where we have to figure out, when we tolerate something, are we giving it a pass? And now, look, as you know, I get involved in the mascot debate, where non-native schools, towns are using native images for their school mascots, and look, there's no way around it. It's a mockery. I mean, you basically got white people, playing Indian, and so they adorn their uniforms or their helmets or their gym floor with these images, and they begin to develop this strange, I call it fetish, being fetishized almost, but this strange obsession or connection to this image. And this happens with native people more, with native images more. I never heard anybody talk about being a panther when they're 40 years old, but there are people that'll still cling to this stuff. And so this obsession becomes, it gets to the point where it's a little creepy, but you have people who may believe that it's peculiar, but they tolerate it. And nobody ever calls out, gets called out on this stuff. And I bring it up because, specifically one of the battles that I'm going through with this mascot issue is my old high school. And the conversation has been among some of the school board members, well, maybe there's a gray area. Maybe there's some common ground. And this idea that somebody's going to promote this idea that, well, we can tolerate a little bit of racism. We get into this debate of what is the mascot itself, is the word or the image racist? And some of them are. I mean, you take the Washington football team, its previous name, is a racial slur. Some of the buffoonery that's associated with some of the images, like the Cleveland baseball team, that's racist. I mean, and I think it does clearly cross a line. And many of the people who are still fighting to keep their high school mascots will say, oh yeah, well, Washington, that crossed a line, or Cleveland, yeah, that crossed a line. And they'll try to maintain that theirs is dignified. And so they ignore the fact that it's not just whether the word or the name or the image or red face or whether, all that stuff, whether that stuff is crosses a line, and it does. But the very idea of using a people who you are not, but using somebody else's culture, somebody else's history, especially after you mix it up a little bit, you mash it up, you change the narrative, you make it sound like, oh, these were such noble people. They're such noble people. What'd you kill them for? So you get the sense from a bunch of people that if you do it right, you can adopt a racist practice like using Native people for mascots. And I'm just using this as an example because the word tolerance comes in. The question is, should we be tolerant of somebody's view that may be a little racist? And where it comes down to sometimes is this notion that I can participate in a practice that might be characterized by some as racist, but that doesn't make me a racist. And I even walked that line a little bit. I said, look, I'm not saying all you people are racist because you have a Native mascot. I'm saying the practice that you are engaged in is racist. And so, and I've seen this parsed out before, where people said, well, you don't have to be a racist to do something that's racist, or to have to conduct yourself in a racist manner, or to say racist things or have racist thoughts. I'm thinking, I don't know. Can you? And does this kind of get back to that issue of tolerance? Oh, yeah, I can tolerate racism as long as it doesn't affect me, or if it doesn't hurt somebody specifically that I know. This gets down to this word of tolerance. And look, when I hear about diversity training, and I hear about, oh yes, we're a very diverse community. We teach tolerance. Well, I'm thinking, as a Native person, I don't want somebody to just tolerate me. I'm like, look, and in fact, if you find me offensive because I take a strong position on stuff, then don't put me into that category as, well, that's just somebody I'm willing to tolerate. Because that's not a compliment. It's certainly not a compliment to me, and it's not a compliment to you either. So I think we have to get to this place where we do draw some lines. What are the things that we are willing to tolerate? And when we tolerate something, are we accepting it? Do we become complicit? Because that's really comes down to it. Martin Luther King, he thought that the most dangerous people when it came to the advancement of freedom and equality for black people wasn't the KKK. It was the moderates. It's the ones who thought social order and peace was more important than correcting a problem. So, well, this is where you're gonna come up with other solutions to address racism than confronting racism. And in Cambridge, the school that I went to, what we're seeing out of a couple of board members is this desire to keep it so nice and to play so nice that you don't offend anybody. And look, and to a certain extent, let's be clear. The ones who are afraid to confront an issue are really afraid about their standing in the community. It's not because they may also be very tolerant of racism. So I don't want to let them off the hook that much. But the way they're trying to characterize their view on this is, well, but we can't have a divided community. We can't have anybody feel like outcasts. So maybe there's a way, and a school close to Cambridge, where I went to high school, is another town called Mechanicsville, and Mechanicsville called themselves the Red Raiders, and they've been debating this whole mascot issue too. So they decided that they're going to strip away all Native imagery associated with their mascot or their logo or whatever else, and they're just going to call themselves Red Raiders. I don't know what a Red Raider is. But I have to admit, the first time I ever heard that expression, I didn't know that they were talking about Native people. It wasn't until I saw logos that showed, look, the Oakland football team is the Raiders, and theirs is kind of like a pirate or something like that. So, I didn't automatically assume that when somebody said Raider or even put the word red in front, that they were talking about Native people. I knew what when they said Redman or Redskin or Savage or even Warrior, I knew what they were saying with those things, but I didn't know that. And so then when I realized that all of these schools who had used this, this name, this moniker, Red Raiders, that they were all basically meaning red people, Native people. and that they were, these people who raided, poor white people. I mean, that's the imagery, right? I mean, in many ways, the name Red Raider is worse than Redman or Redskin. I mean, and those are pretty bad. I mean, those are pretty bad because they essentially reduce a human being down to the color of their skin. But Red Raider does that and associates them with this criminal activity or this barbaric activity of raiding poor innocent women and children, white women and children or something. So, yeah. So Mechanicsville, they found some middle ground. They decided, okay, we're going to keep the name Red Raiders, but there'll be no suggestion that when we use it that we mean Native people. They're just going to have their logo is going to be an M for Mechanicsville, and they're going to be the Mechanicsville Red Raiders with no feathers, no tomahawks, and that was their solution. And you know what? That's some bullshit. I mean. Look, if the reason that you're getting rid of it is because it's always had this connotation associated with Native people, just stripping away some of that imagery isn't really an adequate change. So, I mean, this is this idea. Well, we can tolerate a little racism, and we're going to find some common ground there. So that's what Mechanicsville did. And so when I hear Cambridge, now they're the Indians. What's the middle ground? Keep the word Indians and have Gandhi be your logo, your mascot? I mean, come on. I mean, you can't do the same thing that, frankly, even Mechanicsville wasn't that successful with. This is that problem where people are so afraid to confront an issue, and so they preach or they promote this idea of tolerance. Tolerance is not respect. Tolerance isn't even acceptable. I mean, it isn't even acceptance. It's like, yeah, I can put up with it. Yeah, I don't like it, but I can put up with it. Now, look, when you're talking about, from a medicine standpoint, yeah, somebody can be tolerant of, a transplant or something like that, or they can be tolerant to a medicine or whatever else. But that's not the same thing as this. This is where you are literally saying you don't have to like it, you don't have to respect it, you just have to tolerate it. And I find it particularly offensive, especially when you're talking about children. And let's be clear, these board members who are somewhat indifferent about how it's going to affect their standing in the community, they aren't really concerned about what's happening with the children, because then there would be zero tolerance. I mean, and now zero tolerance is a tolerance that I can understand. And this is where you say, no, we're not going to have any of that here. So how do you suggest you have zero tolerance for discrimination, but you are going to find some middle road on how you deal with a race-based mascot? Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it's impossible. So what you do is you compromise and you become complicit. You become those moderates that Martin Luther King talked about. So if you aren't prepared to draw a line and say, no, we're simply not going to tolerate a racist activity associated with our school or associated with our community. And it goes beyond the mascot issue. I bring that up because this, I got a little bugged after hearing about the latest board meeting and some of the capitulation that was coming out of, a couple of the board members. Look, I'm not feeling like we're not going to win this little mascot battle. We will. I mean, but it's just, it really is shameful. That you can have people who, I don't know, who are just so gutless when it comes to to taking a stand on something that you don't have to be the one to determine that the behavior is racist. It's already been done for you. There's been studies that have been done. There's been education secretaries that both at the state level, at the federal level. There's been UN commissions on this stuff. We've had every Native organization that's that's expressed any view on this have made it very clear that they think it's in their view it is a racist behavior. So you as some white woman on a school board, you don't have to look. You don't have to determine whether the practice of using a marginalized people as a mascot is racist. That's already been worked out. It is. I mean what you got to work out is whether you're going to promote tolerance for that. And that's the position you're going to take. Now, again, this idea and this concept of tolerance, it doesn't just stop with this. We as Native people, part of what we have gone through in this 500-year genocide was what we were willing to accept and tolerate. And and this is where we get into some of the identity crisis issues. What are we willing to tolerate when it comes to things that are clearly meant to harm our communities? And I'm not talking about skin color. I'm not talking about gender preference. I'm not talking about fashion statements. That's not the tolerance that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about how far are we willing to go to remove ourselves from some of the very principles that define us in terms of character and identity. And I've got the two-row wampum illustrated behind me. How far are we willing to step out of off our path and lose track of it and lose track of who we are? And we get into this debate with everything from enlisting in the armed forces, or at least I'm willing to get into this debate. Voting in the non-native elections, running for office, the careers you choose, and that kind of stuff. I mean, what are you really advancing? Look, even a simple thing like administering a Facebook page or a website. What are you willing to tolerate when people post that people post on your page? And when you are willing to tolerate something, what are you saying about what you're providing a platform for? So, I mean, there are some things that I am not a big fan of showing up on my page. So I remove it. It's not because I hate the content or I hate the people who are posting it. There's a lot of friends that I have that are post something. And look, if I came across it someplace else, yeah, I might take an interest in it, but I don't necessarily want it on my page. My page is supposed to be about Native issues. My page is supposed to be advancing the struggles that we have. So, look, I don't do a whole lot of, pictures that objectify Native women. I don't care how beautiful they are. So I don't do that. That's the stuff that, while, people are free to do what they want to do. I mean, dress the way they want to dress and that kind of stuff. But I don't have to provide a platform for it. So this discussion about tolerance, I think we all have the opportunity to create a standard for ourselves. And that standard, it may change. I mean, genuinely, we learn things over the year. I'm not saying that everything that I believed when I was 16 years old is what I believe when I turned 60. But so what do we, from a morality and an ethics standpoint, how do we maintain, something that's true to ourselves? And I think this is the debate. Look, I get into a conversation oftentimes about people who want to claim to be Native, for instance. And, so this idea of pretendians or apples or, whatever, frauds, wannabes, as they call them. If somebody tells me they have Native ancestry, I don't necessarily call them out on it. And I assume that they believe that. But when somebody says that they're Native or they're part Native, that's where, what does that even mean? I mean, so when we were battling Lancaster over the mascot issue, in fact, one of the board members says, well, I'm part Native. I said, really? What part? I give the smart ass answer right off the bat. And I said, but do you practice the culture? I mean, do you have family that live in a Native community that you frequent from time to time or maintain some sort of relationship with? Do you understand any of the aspects of it? And then she said, no. I said, well, so you're not Native. You just have some Native ancestry, or so you've been told. Yeah. Well, you do understand the difference, right? And see, this is what we have. And anytime we get into a debate about something like the mascot issue, we're invariably going to hear somebody say, well, I'm part Native too, and I'm not offended by it. Well, you don't speak for Native people. I don't care if you believe that you are part Native, or you have, or even if you have Native ancestry. Because if you are not living as a Native person, I don't care whether you're 1/32 or whether you're, the full blood. If you have really moved yourself so far away from Native people, your family, your ancestry, your culture, your territories, if you've removed yourself that far away, I don't think you get to speak as a Native person on issues that Native people are confronting. And especially if you're clearly going to side with take the non-Native side of the argument, and you think that your voice gives permission to that, and that's and that's what we have, right? We have that debate not just as it relates to mascots. We have it that debate over politics. We have that debate over military service, over spirituality. Again, tolerance. How much do we accept that the damage that was inflicted upon our people by the church, from the very beginning, especially as diseases were being spread, intentional and otherwise, the fact that that religion was used to, or disease was used to try to convert some of our people, murder was used to convert some of our people. Crucifixions were used, and massacres were used to convert our people into that belief. So when you understand that some of these religions were imposed on our people at the end of a sword or a gun or a rope, today should we be tolerant of those belief systems when that's the way they came into our territories? Now that we have equipped ourselves with a little more ability to have choice, look, even Onondaga that wanted to pray, promote itself as the most traditional community of the Haudenosaunee territories. They had a whole bunch of churches there. I think they had 4, 5, 6 churches there. In fact, a couple of Native kids burnt one of them and went to jail for it. And and look, I'm not promoting the idea of arson, but this. I heard some of the old timers, even some of the old chiefs like Louis Farmer, who says one of the biggest problems we have here in Onondaga are the churches. But they became tolerant of them, and so you end up in every community. You end up with a bit of a rift that exists. And that rift goes all the way down to this idea of spirituality and religion and what they believe in. And of course, then some of that stuff starts to come in even into the non-Christian belief systems. I've talked about funerals, and I've talked about how, we hear people crossing over to the sky world, just creating a Native version of Christian heaven. Or Christian hell. We allow these things, this idea of good and evil as prescribed by religious beliefs, has infiltrated our creation story. When we talk about the left-handed and the right-handed twin, I've talked about this before. This is another example that rather than understanding the difference between the left-handed and the right-handed twin, according to the story, it gets pitched as a good versus evil thing. And we tolerate it. You see, we allowed that to come in, and this is what we have. Many of the Code of Handsome Lake, Garuio, there's no question that there was major Christian influence there. Some people believe, who are believers of this religion that that people associated with Handsome Lake, that Handsome Lake saw Daganowida as Jesus Christ. And we tolerate it. Now, look, and I know there are people who promote the Code of Handsome Lake who don't believe that, but they become tolerant of the conversation. And so you have to be you don't know where you stand. I mean, I've heard some people say it very matter of factly that that the Code of Handsome Lake is proof that we were that we were Christians, and that the Gonaweeda was proof that we were Christians before Christians came here. And there's not a strong enough rejection of some of these concepts. And I'm not saying rejection because you have to be hateful or angry or we have to, to be intolerant of those shifts in thinking and culture is not a terrible thing. I'm not saying you got to reject somebody because they're a Christian, but I think we should become a little less tolerant of how these things, to how these things alter our identity and our belief systems. I mean, look, we get inundated with these New Agers. And part of this, even some of what took place last week at the Capitol with the Q shaman and whether he is appropriating some native imagery or not. I mean, regardless where you come with all that stuff, there's no question that our communities oftentimes attract people who come to our territories who want to promote themselves as allies when they're really some of these New Age spiritualists who want to gravitate and pull some aspect of Native culture and then create something different from it. So yeah, they're gonna burn sage and tobacco and they're gonna adorn themselves with wampum and turquoise and everything else. And the next thing you know, they're putting out on sweat lodges. And they are the ones dancing out at powwows and that kind of stuff. So that may sound really, really great to be intolerant or to be tolerant of people in different cultures and that kind of stuff. I'm very tolerant of other cultures. I'm just not as tolerant when it comes to the idea that you're going to try to affect mine with your belief systems. Have yours, and I can respect yours. I can respect somebody being Christian, even though I don't respect what Christianity has done to Native people historically, and even fairly recent. I mean, the residential schools; those things only shut down in the 70s, 1970s. In the United States, and in the 1990s in Canada. These were government-funded, church-run organizations that had one main mission in life, which was to assimilate and to wipe out any aspect of Native culture and identity from children. No, we should not have been tolerant of that. But those things existed because we were tolerant. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll go a little farther with this one. So this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back. All right. Hey, thanks for coming back. Hey, let me remind people that we are primarily a podcast here. Yes, we put video of the programs on YouTube and on Facebook, but we are primarily a podcast, and you can find us on any of the major podcast platforms. So you can actually go to Linktree / Let's Talk Native, and Linktree, to punch it in, it's linktr.ee/ Let's Talk Native, and you'll find all of the links to the platforms that carry our podcast, and you'll also find the link to our YouTube channel as well. I encourage you to check out the podcast and subscribe, and then you'll have it. You'll get notices. You once you sign up, you'll get the RSS feed to your phone or whatever else, and then you don't have to watch us on Facebook or YouTube. You can just listen to the podcast. So, by all means, I do want to encourage people to check out our podcast. We do have some changes coming forward, and I think some changes that'll make it perhaps a little more listenable. I don't know. We'll give it a shot and see what we come up with. But we have some changes coming forward. So I want to remind people that we are primarily a podcast. We also do a radio show in New York and in Washington, D.C., but we're actually creating a little bit of distinction between Let's Talk Native and what is now Resistance Radio, that is both in New York and Washington. So just kind of giving people a little heads up on where we're at, I guess. Speaking of where we're at, I was talking about COVID-19 quite a bit. And with so many other things in the news and so many other things happening, it didn't go away just because I stopped talking about it. In fact, the United States is crossing the 400,000 mark for the number of deaths. So and again, you got to be clear. No other country, and I'm not saying every other country has had the level of transparency that the United States has. And we can debate how transparent that is. But no other country has experienced this massive loss of life. And you got to attribute some of this to the incompetence in government, both at the federal level and at the state levels. But 400,000 people have died. So all of you who said, well, this is no different than the flu, and all the deniers who want to say, that mask wearing is too inconvenient, 400,000 people have died. And those are confirmed deaths that are directly attributed to having the disease. By many estimates, there are at least 100 or 200,000 more people who died because of COVID-19. And when I say because, what does that mean? Well, they didn't go to the hospital, even though they had chest pains. So they died of a heart attack. They didn't die of COVID-19, but because COVID was so rampant in hospitals, and this is what New York City had experienced, there are many people who are avoiding medical treatment, needed surgeries. There are a lot of decisions that people are making because of COVID that have resulted in loss of life. And I firmly believe that there are far more than 400,000 who have died because or died with the disease. These are just the ones that were tested and confirmed to have the disease and died of it. So it is a big deal, and by many estimates, we haven't peaked out on this thing. Yeah, I know they developed a vaccine, the rollout's been terrible, but we're seeing the death rate, that is going in excess of 4,000 people per day, and that still can go up. Much of the death rate that we're seeing today is not from Christmas; it's from Thanksgiving. And and now look, we're doing all kinds of things. We're sending tens of thousands of people down to from our communities to storm the Capitol. Most of whom were wearing masks. I don't mean we literally were sending people, but we know the people from every community, every state, had some of their people go to this thing. We're having a real difficult time living with the precautions that we need to live with to see this disease fade away. And so it's not fading away. So again, these are scary numbers. They're going to get worse before they get better. I know people are optimistic that the vaccines are going to help. And, frankly, I'll get a vaccine when it becomes available to me. But here's the problem. We don't know how long your immunity will last when you get a vaccine. Will it last 3 months, 5 months, 6 months? A flu vaccine you get every year, right? So this is a difficult one. So I just wanted to mention that because I haven't talked about it much. And look, Native territories and other peoples of color, Black communities, Hispanic communities, they have been hit harder than anybody else. And even here on the Seneca Nation, we haven't gotten a lot of news about this. The Navajo, because they are a more populated and more vast territory, they are getting a lot of attention because of the death rate and the spread of the disease. But if you compare the numbers, amounts of infection and the amount of deaths compared to the overall population, Seneca Nation, where I'm living here, is probably doing, probably has numbers that are as bad, if not worse, than what Navajo territory has gotten. And, it's not, the sheer volume of numbers may not be high, but as a percentage of the population. So yeah, we're concerned, and I'm hoping the vaccine will have its effect. Look, I miss a lot about what I was able to do a year ago that I haven't been able to do for almost a year now. I mean, look, I used to go to New York every week and do a radio show. I used to host events. I used to do speaking engagements, and and I hope to return to that stuff. And I hope that to return to a life where this isn't what's always on your mind. Who the next person is that's sick. And I've got family members who've gotten it. So, not here, but in other states. So it's concerning, and I just want to mention it because I don't want to think because I'm not talking about it, anybody think because I'm not talking about that somehow I've dismissed it. No, I look at the numbers every single day, and look, I may obsess over the numbers a little bit, but I look at the days that where there's over 300,000 infections in a single day, or over 4,000 deaths in a single day. I look at where the states are. I've got family who live in Pennsylvania, my daughter and her kids. So I look at the Pennsylvania numbers. I look at the Texas numbers. I look at the California numbers because I have family members in all those places. So yeah, it's concerning. If not terrifying, it is concerning. And, and I don't see life going back to the way it was before this. And so I think we have to figure out what is going to be, how much do we learn from this? And I don't mean just learn in terms of technology and how we communicate with each other and visit with each other and that kind of stuff. But, how do we understand the fragile nature? In order for life to have, even began on this planet, it required a special set of circumstances. And sometimes along the line, just like when you're in the uterus here and you're developing as a fetus, it only takes a very little to go wrong that can affect a life and a quality of life. And it doesn't take much to screw things up. And it just seems like we, as a species, throw caution to the wind. And we don't think twice about, how much we're screwing up the planet. I mean, look, we're in mid-January here today, and I don't know that we've had a sub-zero day yet. We've had a little bit of snow in December, but, this is among the mildest winters that we've ever seen. That's climate change. And we still don't want to take ownership of it. So, we should recognize the things that we need to do to, preserve a quality of life. I don't mean preserve a status quo of life, but a quality of life. I think we need to understand that there are things that we need to change. And, it gets back to the question of tolerance. Look, I understand that life is dynamic and that it does change, and we have to be accepting of, some of the changes that life throws at us. But we shouldn't be tolerant of those who are willing to place us all in jeopardy. And so whether we're concerned about whether our culture is in jeopardy, whether our identity is in jeopardy, whether our lives, our water, our air, our land, these are the things that we need to have we need to have standards. And I'm not saying those standards can't change, but they shouldn't be allowed to be dropped without some thought. I mean, look, we talk about critical thinking. We should understand what is dangerous. And, and as we get into, whether it's a business or whether it's, a belief system, when we decide we're going to advance our education, are we gaining knowledge or are we losing knowledge? I mean, this is one of those debates. Look, one of the things that's going to come out of this whole COVID experience is going to be, are people going to look at higher education the same way? I mean, are people going to spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a college education when they realize that they could get the same quality education by opening up their laptop? or some semblance of it. Maybe you can't get the same quality, but things are changing. And I think this is the stuff that we have to be, we need to understand stuff. And while I'm not suggesting that we have to be intolerant to change, I think we have to understand that this idea that it is incumbent on us to be tolerant of all change is something that we have to be a little bit more worried about. And you look at, again, we hear a lot about unity. Yeah, every time I see somebody post on social media, well, the problem with Native people is that they haven't unified. Well, look, white people haven't unified either. I mean, Catholics and Protestants were killing each other. They basically believe the same thing. They were killing each other over the small, minute details of difference between they weren't killing each other over religion, but religion is what defined them. I mean, we've seen, in the United States, the amount of divisiveness and factionalism and division that exists is incredible. And so when people talk about unity, I mean, it's really strange that some of the people who can be the most abusive and the most intolerant, when their backs get pushed against the wall, they say, "Well, no, we need to promote unity." I mean, give me a freaking break. So as I look at, the tactics that the political right has used, and the weakness that is demonstrated on its face by the left, I'm not going to promote the level of tolerance that that some are saying. And this is where you get to this idea of moderate, right? And back to what Martin Luther King said. Look, I think having a standard, I have no problem with being a standard bearer of of the left or a standard bearer of the right, because at least you know what people stand for. And I don't mean right in terms of just white supremacy, but I mean if you are a conservative when it comes to things like finances and and that kind of stuff, or if you're a liberal when it comes to social justice causes and that kind of stuff, I can appreciate all of those positions. But what happens is these things end up being twisted. The ones who say they're conservative fiscally are only conservative fiscally when they're attacking Democrats. The ones who say they promote social justice won't really go on the line when it comes to say, look, having an armed or militarized police force is dangerous. And now you're going to see the left and the right come together, because now you've got, not only do you have the right condemning the riots that they associated with Black Lives Matter or try to associate with Antifa, but now you got the left who's going to, be again up in arms and want more of a police presence and all that other stuff to combat the Proud Boys and these white supremacists. So all of a sudden you have the left and the right go so far apart they meet on the backside. And so the answer is police. Really? And this is where it's difficult. I mean, I don't think that they should stop all forms of protest. And I don't think that the police need to be more aggressive. Look, we can argue whether that the one cop who fired a shot at the Capitol riots, whether was it necessary? Did it accomplish? If one shot was necessary, then why weren't more shots fired? Perhaps none of them. The fact that the police kind of gave in at some point, did that save lives? Absolutely. It probably did save lives. Now, I'm not saying those people shouldn't be prosecuted for what they did, but if we think the answer is always going to come at the end of a gun or a club or a nightstick or pepper spray or whatever else, this is what we've experienced as Native people. We've experienced this. The very aggression that some people are calling for now is what Native people experienced throughout our history. We were massacred, shot like fish in a barrel at Wounded Knee. They brought in not just the Royal Canadian Mounted Police against my relatives in Ganazadage in the Oka crisis. They brought the military. They had jets flying over. They had the Navy in the rivers, and they had the Army there against a small Native community. I mean, this is intolerable. So, I mean, look, we better be careful what we wish for and what we allow us a specific circumstance to allow us to accept. I'm really concerned that that the recent events in Washington D.C. are going to encourage a more aggressive police presence in many places. Look, the idea of militarized police, that didn't always exist. Look, our police were always armed and they were always aggressive. But it wasn't until black people started arming themselves, the Black Panthers in particular, that SWAT teams were developed. And this idea of using literally military equipment, weapons, the military no longer, we'll give them a new life with police departments. When they used to have SWAT teams, they were specific. They were a specific group of police officers that were trained only to go in where violence was already occurring. They weren't arming every police officer with automatic weapons and these military grade pieces of equipment. No, it was very specific, used in a very specific way. When those people stormed into Breonna Taylor's apartment, they created the violence. There was no violence going on there. They showed up, bashed the door, and created a violent situation. And now, so we get all of this, a year's worth of calling for defunding the police and abolishing the police in some cases. And now, now people want to praise police and say, well, they should have done this and they should have done that. I think for most places, police don't have to carry sidearms. I mean, look, my son was a Seneca Nation Marshal. I remember when he first talked about possibly going to get a pistol permit. I said, "You want to carry as a Seneca Nation Marshal? Really? Why? Do you want to shoot somebody? Do you think you need to?" And so you get into this debate because if you have it on your side, if you're carrying a sidearm in a position where you're trying to promote peace, at some point, that option of pulling that gun out is only possible because you have the gun there. One of those police officers who was, beaten and assaulted in the Capitol Police riots, he was so concerned as they had him down and they were stomping him on the ground that somebody was going to pull his weapon from him and shoot him with his own weapon. In fact, he said he heard them calling him that. That weapon that he had was the most dangerous thing. It wasn't the badge. It wasn't the nightstick. It wasn't, it was none of that. His gun was the most dangerous thing. And he brought the gun to the fight. And he's lucky that somebody didn't pull the gun. He's also lucky, and he said this himself, he thought about pulling the gun to defend himself. And if he had done that, he felt pretty strongly that they probably would have overtaken him, and then they would have been justified in killing him. In their minds. We can argue whether they really would have been or not. So look, I've had plenty of guns in my life, and I don't feel like I need to have a gun to protect myself. And I know many of you do. And I'm not saying you don't. But I certainly don't need to go to the grocery store with it, or a concert, or any place else. So I don't know. This, gets into this discussion about the quality of life we want to choose to live. And I see anytime there's something that happens, like whether it's a pandemic or whether it's, political unrest or, gross violations of social justice, we can degrade. We can really go down a spiral that, brings out the worst in us. And while I'm not going to sit here and promote kumbaya moments for unity and that kind of stuff, I think we should remind ourselves sometimes, what it is that we all want out of life. And if it has to come at the cost of somebody else, if your happiness, if your freedom has to come at the cost of somebody else's freedom, and it does. I mean, in many cases, it does. Look, like much of nature, there's a certain harmonious competition that exists in life, whether it's trees competing for sunlight or blades of grass or animals for food and that kind of stuff. Look, there's a lot in nature that creates a conflict. Not an insurmountable conflict, but a conflict that works its way out with a certain amount of balance. The most unbalanced part of creation is us. We're the unbalanced one. We're the ones who are willing to kill at a vengeance. We are the ones who associate power and might and the ability to inflict massive casualties as a sign of greatness. I mean, I hear people talk all the time. The United States, the greatest power that ever exists, the greatest country that ever exists. Based on what? The quality of life isn't even that great. I mean, I'm not saying it's terrible, but it's not that great. And there's a lot of, look, the disparity between the wealthy and the poor could not be greater than what you see in the United States. And when I hear somebody even suggest that the wealth and poverty disparity does not contribute to a poorer quality of life for those on the bottom end of that scale, I'm sorry, you're just lying. You're just lying. And this is where we're at. I mean, this is where we're at with a lot of what we're seeing. I mean, and like I said, the disparity that exists shows itself during a pandemic. It shows itself in a court of law. It shows itself in our affluence or the lack of affluence. We have, as Native people, we really set right at the bottom end of almost every scale you don't want to sit on. And that's not because we were naturally predetermined or somehow genetically predetermined to be at the bottom of those scales. It's driven by American policy. It's driven by racism. It's driven by this desire to inflict conformity on so many people that simply will never fit in with the standard that has been predetermined by whiteness. And look, it's not because many Native people can't abandon their culture and just live as a darker version of white people. But we have to abandon our culture to do it. I mean, there's still to this day is a call to end the idea of Native people living on their own territories. And I've heard politicians for decades suggest that, the establishment of reservations is the worst thing that ever happened to Native people. No, I mean that is a firm belief. And so this desire, this effort to continue a more tolerable version of genocide, one that is geared towards assimilation, one that encourages us to vote in their system and serve in their armies and run for their offices. It'd be great to think that there's a place for us in the United States system, in the U.S. system. Oh yeah, Deb Haaland, she's going to be successful. She's going to Interior Secretary. Is she really going to be able to affect change, or is her position, there is the very idea of her being in that position because is it established because they don't want to affect change? Is that the change? Mitch McConnell was once quoted as saying, when asked about reparations, what do black people need reparations for? They had a black president for 8 years. That was the reparation. Is Deb Haaland the reparation that we get? They're going to promote one person to this high plateau of power and authority, if that's really what it is, and that's what we're supposed to accept as the gift that we get. And keep in mind, very little comes to Native people, black people, Hispanic people, that white people aren't the ones who have to give it. We're in the situation where we can't affect change without having the graciousness of white people help us affect that change. This is kind of where we're at. Hey, look, I want to thank you guys for listening to the program. I want to thank you for for allowing me to rant sometimes. Look forward to doing it again. We'll be back in a couple of days, and look forward to doing it all over again. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.
The pressure be calling, left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back, tell me I'm garbage, I'm going through something, that's why I ain't calling. Phone and progression, it's all that I wanted. The phone and affection, I summon and dub it. Cause bitch, I got problems on problems on problems on problems on problems on problems, I solve them. I run through the money, the pressure be calling, left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back, tell me I'm garbage,